then let's start, shall we? So, Mr. Charles Grodin, you are an actor, a writer, you are a playwright, you're a published author, you are a comic, a humorist, a TV commentator. You're all of these things, right? The ultimate hyphen. We're curious if there's any one of those labels that you're most comfortable identifying yourself with.
Writer, but that's because that's what I do now and have been for years. And when I started, I was an actor, and I was in a Broadway show in 1962, and it was standing room only. It was with Anthony Quinn and the English star Margaret Leighton. There were 3 speaking parts. I got rave reviews and then didn't get another job offer for a year. That's when I decided that maybe I ought to do things in addition to acting, and then pretty soon I became first a director, and then I actually co-authored a musical in 1966 that I directed, and then I became a producer. So it was really very quickly, I realized that if you were going to be in show business, it would be good to develop as much as you could with anything you could do, and that's what I started to do very quickly in my 20s.
Mm-hmm. And you've worn many different hats, and as being funny doesn't have so much limits and definitions to when you call someone a comic, you call someone a humorist or a satirist. Do those things mean different things to you? Not to me, because I don't think so much about things like that. Mostly, what you come to know is it's so subjective. I mean, what's like, for example, I was talking earlier about Ali G. Some people can't stand him. They don't think he's funny at all. So you have to. I had a movie I wrote in 1985 called Movers and Shakers. Starred Walter Matthau, Steve Martin was in it, Gilda Radner was in it. I was in it, Tyne Daly, and one critic said, if you want to know what it feels like to die sitting upright in your theater seat, go see this movie. Another critic, Joel Siegel, who's a national critic for ABC, said, you'll laugh till you cry. Well, neither was true. Now, the fellow that said, if you want to know what it feels like to die sitting up in your theater seat, the humor just wasn't his. It was really inside show business humor. Was it funny? It was to certain people. To other people, they wouldn't know what it was. So it's also subjective. So I'm more focused on that when it comes to nature of comedy than what you might call somebody. Right.
So it's a different people. And my daughter's a stand-up comic, and she can tell you if she's working in New York, she could do the same material somewhere else out of New York, and they'll stare at her. In New York, it's all subjective, and who's the audience, and the critics often, when they're talking about what they see, are really talking as much about themselves, if not more about themselves, than they are about what you see. So, objectivity is difficult because it's also subjective in who's watching, who's listening.
That brings up another point of when you're creating something, when you're writing, do you have in mind an anticipation of who your audience is, and is a lot of what you write dependent on the reaction?
No, because I don't have that kind of choice. I just can do what I do and hope that an audience will find it. What I've learned is that some things, for example, this movie where the fellow thought he was going to die sitting upright in his seat, that really wasn't a movie. But I wasn't experienced enough to know that was more like an off-Broadway show. It was a very inside piece about the movie business. Well, that's not a movie. It was actually Paramount Pictures in the 70s actually bought the title to the sex manual, The Joy of Sex. And the sex manual is all these positions. Well, they bought the title and they didn't know what to do with it. So they called me in to write a movie. And I wrote this movie ended up being called Movers and Shakers. And it was about a studio that bought the best-selling title of it. It was exactly what happened. And then it's all about them struggling. Well, what do we do with it? We can't show positions, Matthau said. No positions, And they said, well, what is it? And so it's about going in circles, not knowing what to do, which is funny to some. And nothing's going on here. And that was my point, but that's an off-Broadway show. That's not a movie.
And in dealing with reactions, sometimes negative, we're going to talk about rejection and the realities of this business. But let's, I think, back up to how you got started. You've written many times that you saw A Place in the Sun, Montgomery Clift, Elizabeth Taylor, and that was it. You decided.
Yeah, I wasn't going to be an actor. I was going to go to the University of Pittsburgh and study journalism, and I saw this movie, Place in the Sun. As I understand it, the same thing happened to Mike Nichols and Warren Beatty. This specific movie moved them into show business. And what it was two things. One is I think I developed an overwhelming crush on Elizabeth Taylor. And two, Montgomery Clift made acting look like, well, gee, that looks pretty easy. Just a guy talking. He was so brilliant that he made it look like anybody could do it. Well, it turned out there was more to it than that. But I went out to Hollywood shortly after I started. I had 3 letters of recommendation from some people in summer stock, and saying nice things. And this one letter was to a very high-powered publicity agent named Helen Ferguson, and she wrote back to the fellow who wrote the letters, whom she knew. She wrote back, his impact on entering a room is as though someone had just left. You know, then I did a scene to get into the Warner Brothers talent program, and I did a scene from a play that was popular at the time called Tea and Sympathy, where the boy may or may not have been homosexual. And this was in the 50s, and I, being very experienced, I thought if I was going to play that part, it would be better if I talked like this. It was just a subtle thing. It sounded real, and it sounded like I could actually talk like this. And they said, his quality is too light. So, in other words, I did it well enough that they just actually thought, in other words, they really thought I was homosexual. And I think the fellow that wrote the letters might have been homosexual. And even a lot of the people there were homosexual. So they assumed I was homosexual. And the same thing happened. I've been in a lot. When I started out, I didn't know from homosexual, from gay. I didn't know anything about it. And I didn't realize that a lot of the people around were gay people. So if a guy said to me, let's take a walk around the reservoir at night, which happened, and I'd say, because that's what I do with my buddies in high school. We'd just hang out at night, and we're parked there talking. And I say, you want to take a walk around the reservoir? And the fellow says to me, someone might see us. I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you are gay, aren't you? I said, no, I'm not. That came up a lot. You are gay. And I said, I'm not gay. And I remember one fellow said, well, you just haven't met the right man yet. And I used that in a movie that I wrote the shooting script for, where I had Phil Hartman say it to me. You just haven't met the right man. And then, you are gay, aren't you? I said, no.
Well, there's clearly a lot you had to learn, right?
Yeah, I knew nothing.
No, go ahead. I'm sitting here resisting myself, realizing that I'm not a comedian sitting here. No, you didn't find the right reservoir.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but it wasn't. I just didn't. Everything was foreign to me. Didn't have to do with is it you're better to be gay or heterosexual. That's irrelevant. But I just didn't know what anything was going on. So people, it was hard to understand where you were. That was just part of it. Not to mention, as we were talking before we began, all the abuse in the early years in acting.
But this is an interesting point, because you bridged a period where homosexuality was something that was considered an aberration.
Hidden, yes.
Or whatever, all the code words.
Yeah, so when I came around, I knew nothing of it. Now it's, you're gay, you're not gay, you're this, whatever you are, and which is the way I felt at the time, except I just didn't want to kiss the man.
Yeah. I
was interested in kissing the girls, and there wasn't a lot of competition. There wasn't. I lucked into that.
Yeah. I find him attractive, don't you?
Yeah, well, that's, I know.
I won't even tell you about my first crush from The Great Muppet Caper. We'll
yeah,
talk about that later. So, you've written a lot in your books. This is a hard business. You really had to pay your dues, and you were really thrust into this being totally green.
Yeah.
And you even have a cute story, and I think it's in. If it would be so nice if you were in here, about the vocational teacher who came into the classroom and said, "Who wants to be in show business?"
That was when I was in high school. Somebody came into the high school class and says, "How many of you want to go into show business?" And suddenly, all these kids I went to high school, like most of them, raised their hand. I didn't. I wasn't looking. I was gonna, as I said, I was gonna go be. Everybody, I would say more than half the people raised their hand. They wanted. I had no idea that all these people wanted to be. And then he just started to berate everyone. He was obviously someone who had tried it, and like most people, had run into one brick wall after another. And he just started to scream at everyone. "You don't know what you're talking about. You have no idea what you're getting into." He just brought out all this venom, and. I wasn't thinking of, but I thought it was just an odd reaction. I often, and that was a real, I won't say defense, because I've always been like this. If you act in a strange way and start screaming at me, I think there's something wrong with you. When I started at the Pittsburgh Playhouse, they would ridicule me because the method acting was coming in then, and they weren't doing that. They didn't have any background in that, but I was interested in it. And instead of like trying to understand it, this is in the early 50s, they would just look at him. He's trying to become the part. He's trying to live the part. Well, instead of it making me withdraw, I just thought, gee, these people really aren't qualified. And I was lucky because I had that sense very early on that if you're going to be inappropriate, it wouldn't affect me. You'd have to really make sense to affect me, so it just wouldn't affect me, and it would, of course, and that sustained me a lot. And when I came to New York and started to study with Uta Hagen, there was an awful lot of carrying imaginary suitcases and opening imaginary windows, and I thought my intention was always to be polite. This happened in economics class in high school, where I would raise a hand and say, I don't really understand. And it would annoy people because I would ask questions. I don't think I was rude. And I was a valedictorian, and I thought if I don't understand it, maybe some other people don't understand it. Valedictorian in my situation didn't mean the 4.0. It was like 3.7. It meant president of the class, but it still was high enough that, but with Uta Hagen, if you'd say, what is this again that we're opening these imaginary windows and carrying these and she really resented it and really was very angry and threatened to throw me out of class several times. And over the years, because I always gave money to the school, she forgave me and then dropped it. And then the last time I saw her, she passed recently. Last time I saw her at some Christmas party, she said to somebody sitting with her, says, "He came into class like he knew I said, "Gee, I'm so sorry if I gave you that impression. That certainly..." Of course, it wasn't true because I didn't know anything. I was just asking, but I really never meant to offend you. And she took my hand and kissed it. And that was my last exchange with her. But for the years that I was there, from 56 to 59, she was very angry. And then one day, like toward the end of the 3-year stint, she said, "He questions everything," which I guess is the way it should be. Because it wasn't done rudely. I just didn't understand. There's so much to do, that might in my mind might make sense in acting, and it wouldn't have to do with carrying an imaginary suitcase or opening an imaginary window. I could see where some people might think it does. I just don't agree with that. They would say it helps develop your imagination. I don't think that's really the problem. I think the problem, the issue for young actors is to get to a relaxed state, to be comfortable. It doesn't really have to do with opening or carrying or things or taking an imaginary shower or feeling imaginary heat. It never came up. And I've done a lot of things in movies, theater, television. What is important is that you are comfortable in front of a camera. And how do you get comfortable in front of a camera? The way you do that is you do it a lot, or forget about a camera. You get up and you perform scenes a lot. You do it. So I did it for 10 years. And then starting on soap operas and moving to live television, it's about comfort level. Another thing about comfort level that I think is important for young actors to know, or young acting students to know, is one of the ways you get a comfort level is you learn your lines as well as you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And most people don't do that. You have to, because when you get into a situation in front of an audience of people looking at you, or when there are cameras and crew and movies and television, there can be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 people with a lot of equipment. There's a lot of distractions. It's not like you're sitting in a chair and say, oh, I know my lines. And that sounds like a pretty simple, basic thing, but the only people I've ever worked with who did what I'm saying are Robert De Niro and Ellen Burstyn. Those are the only two people that were willing to go as far as I wanted to, so let's run it. Not for how you're going to perform it, but to know it. In fact, you don't want to do it how you're going to, you do it kind of flat. And then when you get out there, so the issue isn't what's my line or can I remember. That's where the comfort comes from, knowing your lines and being used to being in front of a camera. I mean, I now in front of a camera or in front of an audience am probably a little more comfortable than if there wasn't a camera or an audience. I'm more comfortable because it's a controlled situation. In fact, Johnny Carson, in reading lately about him, was one of the things he said. That's when he's comfortable because he's controlling the situation. So that's why some of these exotic, what I consider exotic exercises, aren't really on the point. I also feel like that people should lean back a little bit and let the students breathe and let them just find their way and try to be supportive and assistant and sensitive to them. But don't be so overbearing that they're just, it's enough that they're in front of an audience. They don't want to feel that someone's about to jump down your throat. And too many of the teachers were like that because it's a power base and you have to be careful you don't abuse that.
And yeah,
and your question was, what's my favorite color, right?
Right. That was a great response and some really valuable lessons. And I remember reading also when you talk about Uta Hagen, she taught the most valuable lesson to you, which was that she showed you a pure acting moment. Yes,
that's right. And I was doing a scene from Catcher in the Rye, and she said there was a pure acting moment in there. It was the first nice thing she had said other than you can come into my class. And she said, you know what it is? Well, I had no idea what it was. I had no idea. I just wouldn't know. And it was a moment where I had written this essay. Holden Caulfield writes the essay, and the teacher's about to read it back to him, and he's thinking, oh, gee, it's bad enough I wrote it, that I actually have to listen to this. And he goes to him, and I went in to take it back, but he didn't. So it was a moment of not knowing. That was the pure acting moment, that you don't know. That's what they mean when they say just be in the moment, so when something else happens, it's fresh just the way it is in life. Really what you're trying to do is, and what I really try to figure out myself over that 10-year period, and always really is, what is it we're doing when we're acting? When the other person's talking and they say, I was walking along a lake one day, are you supposed to imagine a lake? What do you do as an actor? How do you do it? That's what should have been talked about in my mind. And the answer is, well, what do you do in life? Mostly, it's really recreating life. So when someone is talking to you, your response is much the same. You basically are listening. And if you listen, really listen, and not necessarily like this, just like listen, and you're open to it, what starts to happen after a while, it really happens a lot. I mean, if you get comfortable enough, is it doesn't make any difference. Like Montgomery Clift said, the body doesn't know you're acting. And pretty soon, I was talking, my first interview with Lee Strasberg, I knew someone that got me an interview to go into his classes, and he said, what actors do you admire? And I said, Montgomery Clift, Marlon Brando, and Paul Muni in his early work. Well, in his early work, Lee Strasberg looked at me in his early work. And I was telling my wife this story the other day, and she said, what did you mean? I said, well, there was a movie called I Was a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. I'll show you this right now, just sitting here. I Was a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. It's a man who's unjustly arrested. He's sent to a chain gang in the South. He escapes. He has a horrible, horrible situation. He didn't do anything. And then at the end of the movie, his fiancée, she's putting her car in the garage, and he suddenly appears out of the shadows. He just wanted to see her. And he says, I've got to go. I've got to go. He thinks he hears something. And she says, what will you do? And as he backs into the shadows, he goes, steal. And I can't even say it now because I'm committed to that man's plight because I just let myself feel his situation of desperation. So that's where your emotions get to be if you allow yourself to be open. I've got nothing getting in the way because I'm not thinking about anything but this. And so the same way you could be moved under certain circumstances in life, you can be moved in so-called fictitious circumstances. But I think the experience of acting sometimes is fuller, truer, and realer and richer than the experience in life when you have so many guards up all the time. And in acting, you don't necessarily do that. So you may get a fuller reality then. But that comes from, more than anything, a level of comfort. That's where that comes out, a level of comfort and confidence that you know, at least you know what you're going to say. I've been in plays and movies and about to go on the set, and people are there like studying their lines, like, what were you doing prior to this? You can't be that. You have to be more prepared than that. It's pretty basic, but you have to do it.
But there's also this element of taking chances and letting go.
Well, but you can only do that if you're vulnerable to it, and you're vulnerable to it because you're open. You're open, you know. I could like do anything and just even like do something from a Beethoven movie. It really wouldn't matter. It would still be about, you know, where's my dog? And you just give it over. You just give it over. But again, this can't happen unless you know the words and you're relaxed enough that you can just listen to what's happening and give yourself over to the circumstance. Again, in my mind, this has nothing to do with an imaginary windows, imaginary suitcases, imaginary showers. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with, it's so basic that it's almost like, for some teachers, I think, you know, they feel they have to make it a little more exotic to justify that they have these, that they're these teachers. Where to me, just as in coaches, we were talking about before, athletics or in teaching, there's a tremendous value in letting people alone and supporting them. I was talking to my son last night. I'd seen these, he didn't know this, but I'd seen these 2 videos that he had done. He didn't even know I'd seen them. And then he was on something on the internet. He just did something in high school a couple days ago where he just put this thing on, and I was very complimentary, and then I said, you know, I also saw the 2 videos, and he didn't know that, and he was very like, well, you did? You were supposed to just mail those on. And then I said, it was so good. It was absolutely riveting. You were just absolute, which didn't surprise me. Well, even my son, who's lived with me his whole life, you could see he was a little taken aback because people are so used to like, let me tell you what you did wrong. Well, I didn't have anything to say. And having to say. He didn't do anything wrong. He brought himself to it and he presented it. And, you know, that's good. And that needs support. But I almost never heard that. And what's really kind of sad about all this is that at the University of Miami, at the Pittsburgh Playhouse, at Uta Hagen, at Lee Strasberg, those are the 4 places I studied, there were a lot of talented people. There really were. It wasn't like there was a dearth of talent, but there must have been a dearth of people who could handle all the rejection and abuse. Because I hardly ever saw anyone. Almost everyone who was there, and they were good. I wouldn't say, oh, I was the best. I was one of the people that was good, but there were a lot of people that were good. And the difference was that I took rejection like, what do you think's going to happen? You're new, you're young, you're not. What do you think you're going to come in and say I'm here and you're going to start? That's not. So if you accept that you're going to be rejected, I mean, the first 10 years of my career, I don't know, it was somewhere around $4,000 a year I made, but it didn't bother me. I didn't care because I knew the most important thing, which is I was getting better, and that was what was most important. So when I finally, at the age of 27, got an audition for a Broadway show, they actually came up on the stage and with people waiting to audition and said they wanted me, and they couldn't believe my lack of, I mean, I had done summer stock, I'd done a little, but they assumed, he said, but you've got so much command. And I said, well, that's because I've been studying acting for 10 years. And it wasn't so much I studied, but I was doing it. I didn't have impressive credits. I was just solid. And he said, you're just so I said, well, yeah, if you're standing up in front of Uta Hagen or Lee Strasberg, it's tougher than standing up in front of people who are just people. Because these people are like, you know, like this. That's harder if you can do that. But again, I think that it's very important for the teachers to understand the vulnerability of the students and be supportive and find a way to be helpful that doesn't bring people down.
Can I ask, as a tool, as a mechanism, between takes, midnight run, in the character, cut, what happens? What happens between cut and roll them?
Well, it would depend what the director, if he wanted, does he want something else? In Midnight Run, this is a script written by a fellow named George Gallo. He wrote the characters, he wrote the events, he wrote the script, but he wasn't on the movie. He didn't fly. Lovely guy, but there were 17 locations that he would not get on an airplane. So there was an awful lot of improvisation on the movie, an awful lot. In that movie, maybe more than any movie I've ever done. And when I say improvisation, that would only have to do with the scenes with me and De Niro, because I had nothing to do with any of the other scenes. But any scene I was in, most likely, was improvised. And it was also good because I developed a relationship that developed it with De Niro. So nothing I could think of would just go on. I remember one particular scene in that movie where it takes place on a boxcar of a train, and I get away and I try to slam the door on him to get away, and he gets in there and he wants to kill me, and he's got me like tied up to a thing, and he's just warming his hands over a fire, and he hates my guts, and according to the script, at the end of this scene, he's supposed to kind of feel warmer toward me. Well, there wasn't anything written. And so by that time, I had done so much improvisation that the director just felt like, well, Chuck will just improvise something and get Bob will just start warming up toward him. So he said, go ahead and do it. And I did something. And De Niro, just as in Ellen Burstyn, he's not going to pretend to be amused. So it's just as hard as in life. You have a guy who hates you, and now he's supposed to find you amusing. And he's not going to do it because the script says it. He's going to do it because you made him do it. So I do a couple things and nothing. He didn't give me nothing. It didn't amuse him. So the director comes over and he leans into my ear. He says, I love you. I think you can do anything, but this really isn't working. I need you to really come up with something here. Well, I'm not the writer of the script. I said, okay. Well, I knew then that I had to do something beyond what I had done. I had to get to De Niro in a way that just hadn't happened yet. So it's in the movie like this, too. This scene is in the movie. I feel a little uncomfortable. You can decide whether you want to edit this out or not, but it is in the movie. And I'm just sitting over there, and I said, did you ever have sex with an animal? Well, that kind of caught him up. He said, why would you say something like that? I said, no, we were back on an Indian reservation. I saw you eyeing one of those chickens. I just wondered. And that amused him. Well, no, I was thinking, I didn't take a shot. I mean, it's all there. And that kind of, it's cut through everything, but it had to be that extreme, and there it was.
Wow.
Why would you say something like, well, I know you were looking. I saw the way you were looking at her, at the chicken.
And that's again going back to this unscripted moment of this pure moment for
him. Yeah, and that's the best. But I think it's very interesting. It's interesting to me that in the play Same Time Next Year that I did on Broadway with Ellen Burstyn and in Midnight Run, those two instances, those were the two actors that were willing to do what I wanted to do, which is let's just go off into a corner and run this thing 100 times. Not the way we're going to play it, but just so we know the words, and then we can do anything we want. But interestingly, to me, I hate when people say this is interesting. Honey, you can't say that. I had a play, 1992, the Vineyard Theater produced a play, also called One of the All-Time Greats. And I by that time I knew I didn't want to direct anymore, because when you direct, you're dealing with a lot of personalities, and I don't have a big tolerance for, I like a smoother thing. So I knew him, and he did a great job, the actor Tony Roberts. And I get him to do it, after which he says, boy, you're right, I'm never doing this again. So I come and see the dress rehearsal. Here I come as the writer, and I make a speech that wasn't the first time I'd made it. And I said, everybody was very good. And I try to say it respectfully. I said, nobody knows their lines well enough. And I told this story about Ellen Burstyn and Robert De Niro, and one of the guys playing the lead just blew up. He resented it. He resented what I said. He thought he wanted to hear about Robert De Niro and Ellen Burstyn. He's not living now. I don't want to even say his name, but he could have been so much better. And then, of course, he was seen around the theater after I left, just studying his script a lot harder. He wasn't as solid as he could be. And even now, a play that I had that opened in San Francisco in the fall, I said, come to rehearsal through the director. Know the lines. Some English directors insist on, know this. Because what's going to happen is, toward the end of the run, you'll be as good as you can be. Not opening night, toward the end of the run. So this play is now going to be done in New York, and I have people that have been involved with it for 3 years, showcase readings. Those people, it would be very good that they've been involved with it for 3 years for a feeling of just knowing it. Then you can be what you can be. But you have to know it. I mean, this is so simple. It's like, well, why even go to school for it? But you got to do it somewhere. But it's not about these exotic things, in my experience.
This gets back to some real valuable lessons that you have to offer. And anyone who's read your books knows preparation, determination, resilience in the face of rejection. Are there other skills or tools that you think can be taught that would be valuable for someone up and coming?
Well, again, I would say number one, really get as solid and as comfortable as you can. Say you're going to do a scene in a class, very nerve-wracking thing to do. You have other students, they're competitive. It's not a nourishing environment for the most part. So you really have to know you know your lines, and then hopefully a teacher will suggest something. In Uta Hagen's class, she would talk about, and a lot of people do this, your objective, your action. Your objective, what do you want? Your action, how are you going to get it? Your obstacle, what do you have to come up against? You go to Lee Strasberg and he'll say, you don't have to do that, just get involved and that will find its own life. So no, I think the most important thing is if you really get as much experience so you're comfortable. And experience can be anywhere. It could be, in a theater, in a classroom in New York, it could be on a stage at Emerson College, it could be anywhere. But be up there, and you will be very nervous. You'll be nervous for a long time, but that's okay. Just press through it. Nervous is normal. That's the way it's going to be. And then one day you'll be a little less nervous, and a little less nervous, and then you'll feel like you belong there. That's about that preparation and knowing what you're doing. And then when you get out in the world and you go and with your picture and resume, don't even be remotely surprised that nobody's interested. A great line. It's a great line. It wasn't my line. Somebody said it to me, an agent that I got early on. I said, should I have pictures made? He said, well, sure, have pictures made. Then all the people who don't want to see you will know who it is they don't want to see. Yeah, it would be nice if they saw who they don't want to see. Don't expect anything to happen. Be prepared. I mean, I was a night watchman on the Brooklyn waterfront. I was a cab driver. I worked in a bank. I worked in a post office. It was fine because, again, I was getting better. I wasn't making any money. I lived in a room without a window, literally, without a window. Bathroom down the hall. No stove, just a sink. An air shaft where people on the higher floors would throw bottles of liquor down, saying everything you can imagine. Didn't bother me either. It was exciting to know you were getting better. So give yourself the time to get comfortable. And don't expect anything. And I think a lot of the kids that I started with somehow in their mind thought that they'd come to New York and they'd be discovered and they'd be in things. And when it didn't happen, they went away. Well, I didn't go away because I didn't expect it to happen. Why should it happen? There have been people doing it for years. And that's who I'm competing against. Well, how could I compete? So that's it. I mean, get yourself prepared, get yourself comfortable, and don't expect anything when you go out in that show business world. And even having said all that, overwhelmingly, the majority of people will not make a living because what you have in acting particularly, and I'm sure in writing and directing, but my more specific and larger body of experiences in acting, you can have really, really, and I know them, really gifted people who can't make a living. Now that's unusual. A really gifted doctor will make a living. A really gifted lawyer will make a living. A really gifted accountant will make a living. But in this situation, I mean, in my case, if I hadn't run into Elaine May, I don't know that I would have been in the movies. She spotted me and decided she wanted to have me star in the movies, and did it. I mean, they didn't, that was the Heartbreak Kid, and normally a big starring role in a script written by Neil Simon, directed by Elaine May, would not go to an unknown actor. But she decided that this guy is special, and I want him. And she's been like this. She did the same thing with Heaven Can Wait. She wrote and said, get him. Get this guy. He's going to do stuff for you that, but that's extremely rare. So what you need is just to keep pressing ahead and be patient. And then, look, you don't want to spend your whole life being rejected. I knew that I'd find something to do in show business, and that was it, because I wasn't really sufficiently interested in other things.
Right.
Professionally.
It's also interesting to note, I mean, you were in Rosemary's Baby. I mean, you were on Anthony Quinn on stage. I mean, you had these successes, and then you go away again. And then you got Heartbreak Kid, and it's like, well, you've been doing this for 20 years at that point? You had been... Yeah,
I've been doing it for 20 years before I was in the Heartbreak Kid. Just because you're in, as I said, the first Broadway show was standing room only, but I didn't get offered anything. And one of the reasons for that, just for reality's sake, was I played a character. I played a character called Bobby Baby. And I talked like this, oh, come on, Ma. And people thought I was like that. In fact, and then the next play, a year later, I played Absence of a Cello. I had glasses and I was all hunched over. And by that time, I was with the William Morris Agency, and the head of the movie department was asked to stop and see me as he saw me in the play. And so he came backstage, and I took off my glass, and I opened the door, and he said, I'd like to say hello to Charles Grodin. I said, I'm Charles Grodin. He said, what? All I did was have glasses. It wasn't like and I was kind of like just a hunched over student from Wharton Business School. So it takes a lot of resources. But the other thing that I want to stress that I know I've said already is develop every skill. Develop writing, directing, everything you can think of. Develop everything just because you need to. So today I do all those things as needed, not directing. I find some people still like to do it. And I grab on to, I have one guy who directs all my plays, and I had never even seen him direct. My producer said he's good, but what I liked is I was so comfortable. He was nicer than I was, and I'm trying to really be nice, but he was nicer. So that really impressed me. I'm knocking myself out for everybody to feel good around me, and he was better than me, and that's what I look for. And to this day, I mean, I speak to him quite often because we're involved in a lot of things together. He just automatically is I ask him to direct everything. He's not a famous guy, and he's just really good. And most importantly, wonderful to be around. A gentleman, sensitive, nice.
The first thing is, how do you respond to being pegged as... You were pegged as the jerk for a while. I mean, that's what people thought you were. And
well, you do that. I mean, that would have been first of all Rosemary's Baby, where people first saw me, and Mia Farrow comes to me, a obstetrician. She comes from a famous obstetrician, but she comes to me, her original guy, and she had this doctor Saperstein, played by Ralph Bellamy. And she tells me this whole story about the devil and her husband. They're trying to impregnate her and give birth to the devil. And, any doctor would assume this is hysterical talk. I mean, oh, yes, you're right. I'm sure they are, In fact, I had a kind of a falling out with Roman Polanski over this. She tells me this whole story about the devil. And I'm the doctor, I listen, and my line is, you may be right. And I just thought, if she tells me a whole story about they're coming after her to have her give birth to the devil, and I say, you may be right, no one's going to believe me. But so at least I should do, like there's some consideration, like is there something going on? He didn't want that pause. Take out the pause, he says, like that. And I said, well... And I explained to him what I just said here. It just seems to me, he says, look, they pay me a lot of money to do this. So I say to you, take out the pause. I said, well, they're not paying me a lot of money, but I know a little something, and I think if I do that, and so I kind of took out the pause. And then afterwards, I went over to him and said, I've been thinking about what you said, and I think you're right. He said, see, good. I said, did you just believe me? He said, yes. I said, well, I don't think you're right at all. He looked at me, he either was going to hate my guts or be impressed. And he decided to be impressed. So he hugged me, took me with him to dailies, slept on it, came back, and never liked me after that. Never liked me. So in years to come, when people would say to Roman Polanski, you put Charles Grodin in his first big movie, he goes, yes, I did. So there was that, and then Catch-22, where I have the sex with a prostitute and then throw her out the window, and Alan Arkin comes and says, my God, what did you do? I said, well, a lot of people died during wartime. After that, I was out to dinner with some people, and they said, what do you do? I'm in the movies. What movies? I say, Rosemary's Baby, They go, somebody really wanted to change their seat. So they believed it. And then, of course, the Heartbreak Kid leaving his wife on his honeymoon. So I wanted to, when King Kong came around, I wanted to play the love interest with Jessica Lange. I didn't want to be the guy responsible for the death of the most beloved animal outside of Bambi. But they wanted me for the bad guy. And Dino De Laurentiis said the people would identify with me because you go to a jungle, you look for oil, you don't find oil, you find a big game. What are you supposed to do? You bring them back, you make them money. People are going to love you. They understand the capitalist system. Okay, I say. So they shoot the movie, and the only thing they changed after the first screening, I was told, is when Kong got loose and tried to step on me and kill me and miss, the audience was so disappointed that they had to recut it. Because that's how much they love me. So you do deal with that. And then I went on with Johnny Carson to let people know that I really wasn't this bad guy. But I unfortunately quickly learned very early on, following a medley of Diana Ross singing her greatest hits, which is literally what happened, and I was an unknown actor, that if I were going to come out and say, well, Johnny, I'm really excited about this new movie I have coming out. I had a lot of fun making it, and the director was a lot of fun. I have no confidence in that. So I have to say things like, he says, well, so how are you doing? I said, well, I can't answer that question because you don't really care how I'm doing. The audience actually goes, shh. So in order to show people I really wasn't like that, I just to survive out there with Carson, or even later with Letterman, I took on this character. And so in no way, so even today, when people meet me, they're very surprised that I'm not something else, like an abusive, cynical, difficult, all that stuff that I was doing. And I hadn't realized, but some people said to me recently, how would you not know that? That's what you were doing. You're like a pain in the ass. That's what you've been like on television, in the movie. How would you not know? People would assume. I said, well, these are roles. So the shock on people's face, first they're like wary, then they start to relax, and they realize, gee, he's actually nothing like that. He's actually the other, and I think because I know, at the same time, somewhere in the 70s, I started appearing with Carol Burnett to promote the concept of friendliness. Letterman thinks it's a bit. You're kidding, right? I said, no, I'm not kidding. So then he starts taking shots at me for fun with Carol Burnett, with Dabney Coleman. I hear about it, and I come on the show with an attorney. I'm going to sue him. People thought that was real, too. I brought my attorney. Well, it's a joke. I said, well, I don't think it's a joke. It doesn't look like it. Show the clips where he attacked me. He said, he's psychotic, he's staying on. And I bring on, remember, Joey Faye. Burlesque comedy, he plays my attorney. And he's sitting there by my side as I'm talking to Letterman. And at one point, he leans over, what, What is it, Letterman? My attorney would like a glass of water. So we stop the whole thing while they pour him a glass of water. He goes, he drinks it. And I'm making a point. You think, he said, you don't think I'm friendly enough. Are you married? He says, no. I said, I'm married. I said, do you have children? He says, no. I said, I have children. I said, do you get massages? He says, no. He's breaking up at this point. I says, I get massages. I mean, so I'm Joey Faye taps me on. What? Sneezes all over me. It's a famous bit. Oh my God, what the? And then they thought I mistreated him. Then I just storm off. You can't get an attorney out of the Yellow Pages. I don't care what anyone says. And I storm off. And then Joey Faye goes to Letterman and says, he is psychotic. So just cementing this. But it's just something, it's okay though. I mean, there's a lot of things you wish were different, but that's the way it goes. I don't really suffer any of that.
Now, what were you doing then? What were you playing with? Were you playing with the public and their perception of what they thought?
I was just trying to survive out there with Carson and Letterman. I hoped that people would know I'm kidding. Because anybody who's going to go on Carson or Letterman and be just like an unpleasant guy, I mean, they know Rickles is kidding, but they didn't know me well enough. And I'm, you know, when I do it, you know, Letterman said, "Boy, you never let up. You just never for 1 second." One time with Johnny Carson, we had a bit where I did this great Muppet caper, and I had this idea that there's a picture of me in a nightclub in a booth with my arm around Miss Piggy, you know, just the two of us out in a dark corner. And the bit was that Carson's got the photograph, which I gave him, and he's supposed to pick up the photograph and ask me what really went on over there in London, excuse me, during the Great Muppet Caper. And I was going to talk about, you know, Kermit and the whole thing, you know, when he got upset, and it's just as though it was like a real triangle, you know. So Johnny goes and reaches for the photograph, and I see him reach, and I go, what's that? What are you doing? He goes, "No, my staff," he didn't know I was kidding. He didn't even know. He said, "No, my staff said, like I'm challenged. You're not going to bring out that picture of me and Miss Piggy, are you?" You know, and it was so real, even he said, "Well, no, I thought," you know. Another time, last story of this kind, you can cut this. The bit with Letterman, I come out, first guest, he's not there. He's got to be home. It's explained to me on a speaker because he has the afternoon appointment with the cable people, and they haven't come yet. So he's delayed. He can't come and host the show. In fact, he's in his office, and they've got him on a monitor, and I'm talking to him on the monitor. And I said, you know, this is a national show. You can't not come because you're home for a cable appointment. Something might have come up for me too, but I'm committed to be here. I have to be here. I don't. Well, there was a lot of mail saying to me I should have been more understanding that he had a cable appointment with the cable people. Nobody thought I was kidding. Pay a price for it.
You're an actor.
An actor.
This is bringing us now full circle
Yeah.
because you are playing with something that people, you know, the serious art of acting.
Yeah.
But then also, in particular to your brand of humor, you brought a serious side to comedy.
Yes.
So I wonder if you could describe.
Well, the serious side to comedy means that you don't really. It's good if you have a comedic, you know, part to you, chops. But the commitment to a Beethoven movie, for example, is no different than a commitment to a Midnight Run. That's I mean, I never treated it any differently. I mean, someone's going to take our dog away and destroy it, and the kids are saying he didn't bite this person. That becomes very serious to me. You see, just by saying it, because I'm open to feeling it and to experiencing it the way you would in life. That's what it is. So it's not really any different than a drama. And the fact that there's comedy around the movie, but what really makes it work is my commitment to the reality of the story and to not take it any less seriously.
When did you figure out you were funny? When's the first time you
I was the humor editor of my grammar school paper. But I have to tell you, I wrote a column and nobody knew what I was talking about. Even then, they didn't know. I read it. It is pretty complicated to follow. But I wasn't in any plays in high school because I had to work at my dad's store. And I didn't really go into this for comedy. I just got cast. I was up at the Woodstock Playhouse in 1960. And because I was the young leading man, I played whatever it was. So when comedies came along, I was in that. And my agent at the time, who I spoke to last night and spoken to for 20 years, he called me. We spoke on the phone last night. I remember in 1960, he came up and he saw me in a production playing Biff in Death of a Salesman. And this was the guy, I was his first client. His second was De Niro, then Scorsese. Then Joe, so he was the guy that had all these dramatic actors. And the director said, because he was happy with what he saw, and the director said, "You should see him in a comedy." And he had he had no interest. That wasn't what he was interested in. But he became my champion, a man named Harry Eflin, who went against everyone. No one was interested. No one's ever interested in unknown people, particularly at a big agency. They just don't care. I mean, it's all about money. And but he was the champion, and it's extraordinary to have somebody like that. Extraordinary to have somebody just championing you when you're unknown and not making anybody any money. So, part of that, of course, he didn't do it out of the goodness of his heart. He saw me on something, and it was a play of the week written by Reginald Rose, who created the Defenders series. And that's an interesting story too, because in this thing I played a tough guy with a knife. This was the beginning of my career. Redford was in it. Jimmy Kahn was in it. We were all like various young, whatever, I think hoodlums. And I came in and I had this scene with Pat Hingle, who had recently fallen down an elevator shaft, the actor Pat Hingle, who was on crutches, really had messed himself up a lot. And I'm supposed to push him around. The director, a fellow named Ralph Nelson, I don't know if he's living, but it's true, over a loudspeaker, just started to berate me, abuse, what are you, people are going to think you're gay, why don't you just, what are you doing? Instead of saying, don't hold back so much, I realize, don't worry, Pat's okay, he should have come down and talked to him, just started to like berate me in every way he could. So it's not just in acting teachers or athletic coaches, it's directors. I worked with a director once before we started. He said, I just want to warn you, I'm a screamer. I said, a screamer? He said, well, I wouldn't do it to you. I was the lead in the picture. I said, I don't know about it. Then he started screaming at the children in the movie. And we had him taken off the movie, which is really unusual. And the producer said, he's screaming at the kid. Yeah, he says, what else? What else? Well, the other day at Daly's was raining on one side of the street, but not on the other. Does that help you out a little bit? Something was wrong with him. Something was really wrong with the guy. He had taken a lot of injections, youth injections. I'd forget what it's from, somewhere in Scandinavia. This is all real stuff. It sounds like making this up. And something was wrong with him. I mean, he's screaming at little children.
Brings me to a question about your support base. There was someone named Don Hall.
Yeah.
And your family was also, early on, both your parents were supportive of you going to acting, even though I don't think they really approved of it ever, but...
Well, they paid for it. I don't think they agreed with it.
But how important is it to have a solid core of support when you go into this kind of a field?
I don't think you can count on it. I don't think it's necessarily there. I mean, along the way you might find, some people that like you, but basically not. It depends on what you need. I don't know. I just figured, I wasn't any good. I just figured, well, how could I be good? I'm new. You don't begin to be a stand-up comic and be great. I mean, I just had a good logical sense of things. I mean, this started early. I was thrown out of Hebrew school. Why was I thrown out of Hebrew school? I was kicked out of the school because we would have to recite this Hebrew written on a blackboard. And I said to the rabbi, what does it mean? What? I said, what do the words mean that we're saying? And I said, it just seems, why don't we know what, and he threw me out of the class. It threw me out of the school. I went to another place. And I was, I was bar mitzvahed, and at the bar mitzvah something happened that might have had a lot to do with what triggered a show business career, because then I was only 13. And the rabbi wrote a speech, but it was 1948 when Israel was founded, so it had a lot to do with that. I don't know how much of it had to do with how I delivered it. I think a lot of it had to do with the content written by the rabbi, but something happened in the synagogue that is forbidden, which is applause. Well, what's that sound? And I think right there, I thought, gee, that's a kind of an interesting thing right there, isn't it? And but that was it. And then until I was out of it, because I didn't do anything in high school, as I wasn't available to, and so I but it was really the rabbi's gift. He was a great writer, great storyteller, and it didn't hurt that it was the founding of the state of Israel, but it benefited me. Don't count on too much is, I guess, the answer to your question. Don't count on a lot of support. Don't count on people reaching out to you. Count on yourself, your diligence, and don't expect a lot. Just try to keep getting better. And the way to keep getting better is to get comfortable. And I won't go over again everything I said to get comfortable, but be prepared, know your lines, get comfortable standing in front of people doing stuff. It just stands to reason, like anything else, if you do it for the 100th time, you're going to be a lot better off than you do it the first time. It's just logical. Understand that. It's not that complicated, but a lot of people don't seem to, oh, we're not interested. Not interested? People just dropped away so quickly who were good, who didn't understand it's going to take a long time. Very few people are exceptions to that. Very few. The one last story, I was with, what's his name? Wish I could remember. He was an action adventure star. Michael Vincent John. And we were on a television show years ago together. And how'd you get started? I talked about 10 years of training. How'd you get started? I asked him, and he says, I went with a friend of mine who was, auditioning for something, and I just went along, and then they looked at me, and they put me, and then I was starring in a movie. I said, well, that's a nice way. It doesn't happen that way, though.
Right, it's really very rare.
Right.
Now, you had a very interesting sort of curves in your career where you had to put in all this hard work to get into these acting roles, and then you went into comedy. And now, then it changed again, and you wrote that book, We Liked You Better When You Were Funny.
I Like It Better When You're Funny, the last book, yes.
Now, you were someone who, obviously, you wanted people to like you.
They like it better when I'm funny, and because when I moved into the cable world, they brought me in there to be a humorist, but pretty quickly I got caught up in social issues, and the show became just as much that, if not dominantly that. And some people like it better when you're funny, and some people prefer that you're taking cameras up to prisons and trying to help people who shouldn't be in prison. I prefer the cameras up in the prison because we have less of those people. So I always will go to where the need is, and I found it with dealing with different prisoners' issues that are astonishing. I mean, I do these commentaries now for CBS News Radio, and I just wrote one that will be on this weekend across the country about somebody was on television this past week and said, anyone who's in prison today, because of the overcrowding in prison, he said, and this wasn't a prison authority, it was a political strategist. He said, because of the overcrowding in prison today, judges are very reluctant to send anyone to prison. So if you're in prison today, you're the scum of the earth. That's what he said. I wrote it down. I was just about done, so I write it all down. And I wrote this comment. I said, is he referring to the hundreds of thousands of mentally ill people in prison as the scum of the earth? Is he referring to all the addicts in prison as the scum of the earth? Is he referring to the elderly people with these draconian sentences for delivering a packet of drugs who are serving 20 years to life, who've never been arrested before? Is he referring to the young mothers, whom I personally know, who were set up by the police with no record to carry it so they could arrest them and send them to prison for 15 or 20 years to life? That's the Rockefeller drug laws in there. Who's he referring to, the scum of the earth? The better description of the scum of the earth are the people that are keeping these people in prison, not the people. That's an opportunity to get that said, and there are not a lot of people who are talking about that. So again, I'll go where the need is, where I feel like I can be of value, and that's what governs me today.
Can you talk a little more about that, about the social value of humor, of using humor maybe to sugarcoat something that's not as palatable?
Tremendously valuable, because I have all these relationships with people. I'm friends with Ethel Kennedy. I'm friends with the Republican Senator Orrin Hatch. I was on the phone with the New York Senator Chuck Schumer yesterday. A lot of these friendships are because I make people laugh. And then in the middle of the conversation, making them laugh, I'll say, we have all this unscreened cargo on passenger airlines. Why isn't there a bigger focus on this? We're patting down people, and they sit in a chair, and underneath their feet are tons of unscreened cargo. Is there something wrong with me? Am I missing something? But it's the comedy, because they know they can talk to me about everything, And so Ethel Kennedy helps me with some prisoner issues. But Ethel Kennedy, Ethel Kennedy knows a lot of people who are estimable people that she could respect. But they probably, I've got her laughing. And that's not so I can get her to, that's just the way I would be. Because if you're talking about these subjects, it's good to try to have some laughs on the way, because I've got this play opening in May in New Haven about the prosecution of Brandon Hine. that I can't. The director's got to work on it now. He's got to, because I can't even read it. I wrote it. It's all transcripts put together like the exoner. I can't even read the thing. It's too crushing. Here's a boy, a teenage boy with some other friends, gets drunk one day, goes out, hang around with some kids. They're looking for some marijuana. They go over. They say, come back later. They go back later. A fight breaks out. One boy stabs another boy. This boy didn't stab the boy. He's just there in the middle of the fight. He's serving life in prison with no chance of parole. It's the felony murder rule. He's convicted of burglary, intended robbery, entering a premises without, they were there in the afternoon. They know each other. I mean, the law, well, how can that happen? Right after the O.J. Simpson acquittal and the boy who bled to death, and this is the most heartbreaking part of the whole play, the boy who bled to death is a policeman's son. So when you hear the mother of, even though I'm trying to help the boys in prison, the most upsetting part are the parents, the policeman and his wife of this boy who was out one day. It breaks your heart. I don't think these sentences are appropriate, but if you want to talk about what's the most upsetting, it's the parents of the murdered boy. So I understand the sentiment of the prosecutors and the jury, but only one boy did it. And everybody's in prison with this boy with no chance of, he's got a worse sentence than Charles Manson.
It seems to me that someone in your position now has two really powerful ways to use humor. You have the way that anyone who is a humorist can, like a Johnny Carson, can take an absurd situation and spin it in a humorous way so that people will listen to him, where otherwise they might say, no, that's too ugly, that's too...
Helps.
And in addition, like you say, you have, because of your position now as also a celebrity, you have access to people.
That's right.
So maybe you could say something about how humor is powerful for many reasons, and there's something you can do with it.
This card right here is very important to me, because people think of me as somebody in showbiz, and then this is my ID card. It says CBS News 2005. Opens a lot of doors along with everything else. Well, I like him. He's a funny guy, but why would I? Well, he's a commentator for CBS News. Oh, okay, yeah. So I'm working every angle. But it's all about, I only do this. I wouldn't do this for, it has to be for people in dire need. I never went out, I don't have a press agent. I never went out to the parties and try to do things for political reasons to advance myself. I can't do that. I never lived in Hollywood for that. I can't do that. But I'd do anything to use all these things you mentioned to be helpful to people who are desperate, who nobody's paying any attention to.
Would you walk around a reservoir?
Only with you, as I know what to expect.
Yeah, you never lived. You actually wrote that in your book. You never wanted to live in Hollywood. You never formed like Hollywood friendships.
No, and in fact, my wife said to me, I was talking. I think it was this morning. I was saying, gee, I don't know. We're just, first you've got Iraq, and then we're looking at Syria, and then we're looking at North Korea, and all these things. You're reading, we're not necessarily going to bomb you. We may, like, wow. And along with all that, you've got all this mean-spirited stuff that's all over the place, and you just become more and more aware of how much of it there is. And my wife pointed out that. And I've said this. She said, well, you're aware of it because you could see that you could do it. And she cited something I did where the head of a studio, this is 25 years ago, said to me, why don't you and my girlfriend at the time have lunch or dinner with my wife and me? And I was uncomfortable because that would mean I would be befriending a head of the studio, which most actors would love to do, but I don't like a subtext there. And so I said, well, send me a memo. I always obey those memos. I just try to diffuse, and the guy never spoke to me. So my wife said, well, you can do it. I said, yeah, but that was 25 years ago. I'm aware of it, but I'm so aware, but I hope I never do it. But I was just uncomfortable, but I would never. In fact, one of the new plays I have, there's a line in it where the character is like the most admirable guy. And his flaws, he says, sometimes my desire for humor overtakes my better judgment. That sometimes something's just witty, but you know what? It may not work for that person. So I'm very careful and hope I don't do it because I see it so often with these things, and sometimes it's not even humorous. People are so hostile, just very hostile environment, more so than ever, I see.
Yeah, what do you think about, we had mentioned hateful humor, or humor that is malicious?
Well, there's I'm not too shiny, am I? What do you think? Feels like I'm okay. There's at this Writers Guild thing on Saturday night, a woman came up from the Times column, bold-faced names. I knew they'd be there. This is one of the most hateful, hostile columns. If they mention your name, they're going to probably say he was eating with his mouth open. These are literal quotes from their column. Or, oh, he forgot, he missed some hairs under here when he was shaving. So they approached me. I knew they would, even though I told the people I didn't want to talk to them. They were still a very nice, appealing young woman, I think carefully chosen for that. Has the tape recorder in front of me. I said, I don't want to do this. This is a mean-spirited column. I don't want to talk. We're the Times. I said, I know. I don't understand why the Times prints this column. It just means spirit. She says, well, what do you think of Chris Rock? And I should have said, Chris Rock is brilliant. He's vulgar, but he's not hateful. He's not mean. He's funny. They're not funny. So it's horrible. It's horrible. And what I don't understand is, I mean, just a lot of unhappy people taking shots at people. And, you know, you got to be careful. You might do it to the wrong person. You know, like me. I mean, one time somebody came after me from the Howard Stern show. I had a battle going with him for years. Guy came after me, was really after me. I was coming to some event. He was throwing one shot at me at another, you know, and instead of just walking away, I went right up to him and I took his microphone and I got right in his face and I said, you know, anything could happen right now. And I guess nobody did that. They were ready to walk away. Anything could happen right now. You understand that? And they, of course, played it on the air, which is what they want. But I wouldn't have wanted to have been that guy because he's much smaller than me. If he'd have been bigger, I would have kept walking. I mean, you know.
Do you think there's ever a time you crossed a line where you did something that you thought was humorous, but it
was absolutely when the heiress to Johnson & Johnson, Mary Lou Johnson, who's deceased now, sitting next to her at a party, she showed me this long list of things that she was putting up all the money for. Boys from Brazil. There were a lot of famous things in there, making movies, Broadway musical. Maybe because I was, you know, in a position, if you're in the theater, you're always kind of like, you don't have the Johnson & Johnson money in the theater. Nobody wants to invest in the theater. And I said something I absolutely regret to this day. I said, well, it all looks good on paper. I was sorry I said it, but I did say it. But again, that was also around 25 years ago. Recently, I don't think so. Recently, I sure hope not. If I am, I'm not aware of it. But I have a very keen, you know, now when I leave today, you'll say, God, here's a guy saying he doesn't take it. He took a shot at everyone in the room. I mean, I did? Yeah. Oh, God, you made everybody feel terrible. The woman with the mic, she's over there in a corner. She needs antidepressants. The cameraman, he says, he's asking me if he's shiny. I would tell him if he's shiny. I've offended everybody. I had no idea.
As a playwright,
I'm sure you're shining now.
As a playwright, you
Every time he starts talking, they cut.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Are we cut now?
Yeah, because now they wait, but it's just because they said I am shiny.
Okay.
Would you like a water, by the way?
No, did you say I'm shiny? I could
Yeah.
I could just pat myself. Is the makeup lady here?
She's here somewhere.
She's so depressed from just the mascara request. Never had anyone. You don't think I know how to make up eyes? No, I
These
didn't.
are eyelashes.
I didn't. You call these eyelashes? No, just a little shiny, I guess.
It's hot in here.
Oh, you know, yeah. What if you had these on?
Oh my God, you've long johns
Yeah, I
on.
always have them on.
What I was starting to,
I'm never
to
cold.
ask, and if Jenny thinks it's appropriate, we can pick it up on the road, is the making a surrogate of a character to say what might be termed.
Yeah, we
I wanna get
got
out.
about 15,
Yeah, I'm okay.
15 or 20
Okay.
more minutes because Cabot's going to show up.
Yeah,
in half an
no,
hour.
I certainly don't want to cross paths with that.
Well, he's got to come and do
Yeah,
videos.
yeah. All right.
Um,
Are we all right? Yeah, okay.
we're rolling, right?
We're rolling this.
You asked if.
I was saying, Charles Grodin is not going to deliver hate. but as a playwright, he can deliver a character who can be surrogate.
I'm writing a play right now, a new play that I've got with me in the car, and I've got just a miserable, hateful guy in there, but he works in this situation, and I'm fully aware of everything you could say that would be so mean-spirited and abusive, and it's because I'm listening to what people do say, and then it's all embodied in this character, and it needs to be to help the play, the comedy work.
Mm. Oh,
yeah.
Well, I wanted to move on. I think you have a valuable thing to, from looking back now, fame, celebrity, the business of show business. Can you talk about the need for agents and managers, and the need for finding good representation?
You can't really get anywhere without somebody representing you. Nobody will take you seriously, and it's very tricky. I mean, I had stacks of scripts offered to me after The Heartbreak Kid, and then I did a movie after that wasn't successful, and nothing. In fact, critics, the critic for Variety said of this movie, it would be sad to think an acting career lay ahead. Literally said that in big black bold print. So, being the person who survives finds ways. So 1 year later, I'm winning a Best Actor award on Broadway to kind of just shove it in his face. And this was a notoriously mean guy. If I was less kind, I could actually tell you famous stories, which I choose not to do because he's gone. But this guy was famously hostile to everyone. Even taught at one of the schools out there, was known to be you just didn't want to get near the guy. He's the critic.
Yeah.
That's the critic he's gone now. But I mean, this is just. And these people are around. They populate the business. I mean, it's really fraught. I mean, my son, who's going into this business, if I didn't, I mean, he has everything that I have and more, in the sense that he just thinks people define themselves. You're not going to define him that easily. He's tougher than I am, and. So because I see that, along with the gifts, that he has that kind of attitude, I have no problem with him doing this. It wouldn't matter if I had a problem or not. He'd do it anyway. He's not the kind of person that asks for permission,
How involved do you get with the business of show business?
I don't really get involved with it. I mean, right now I've got somebody looking into the profits from the Beethoven movies, but that's the first time I've done that, because every place I go there's CDs, DVDs, autograph this, sign this, tremendous. So I asked somebody, would you look at that contract? Don't I have a sizable percentage of the gross? Yes, you do. Would you ask them why they're not sending me some money then? I've done that. That's the first time I've done that, though.
Can you talk about the instance of with The Graduate, with you got advice from an agent, I guess, that you should negotiate for a higher price?
No, that was all me.
It was all you.
I was, to make a long story a little shorter than it needs to be, I was the number one choice to play that part in The Graduate. But in order to do the screen test, which had nothing to do with the acting, in fact, Mike Nichols said, you're the first choice, we don't have a second choice. But I was around 32, and this was a guy maybe 22 or something. And I was heavier than I am now and all that, and we wanted to see how Lord, we got to figure a way, But in order to get the thing on film, they need to make a deal with you first before you do that before they're going to spend the money on doing that. And so they offered me $500 a week to star in The Graduate. Well, it really wasn't about money. It was about fairness. I was making $1,000 for 3 days on something called Felony Squad, an old drama. And I was on Broadway at that time. I wasn't known at all, but I was somebody who was considered good and working all the time. And $500 a week. And they said, we think you're the best young actor in America. And I said, well, that doesn't seem right. The agent says, no, it really isn't. But, so the producer, Larry Turman, called me. He said, don't you realize this is the opportunity of a lifetime? I said, I do. I really realize that. I get it all. It just seems like it doesn't seem appropriate. It just seems unfair. This wasn't about getting a few $100s more a week. It was about fairness. It really had nothing to do with money. And they just came to a conclusion I was going to be so difficult, which turned out not to be the case at all. But when it comes to what's right and wrong, and that's why by the time I came in, they didn't even recognize me. I looked so slim and young. But I didn't know the lines. They gave me 10 pages and said, be there the next day. Everybody had a chip on their shoulder. Mike Nichols said to me, how would you define what the scene is about? I said, Mike, I really don't know. I just haven't had time. I'm not really ready to do this. Well, he didn't like that. I said, can I improvise? He said, no. He says, let me see you jump up and down on a bed. I said, jump up and down on a bed? What would that be for? I just want to see you do it. I said, well, anyone could jump up and down on a bed. Now, this is a young, unknown actor talking to a famous director. He couldn't get rid of me fast enough. And that's why that went away. He did call me a couple of days later and say he wanted me to be in Catch-22. So he did think, but he just thought I was going to be really difficult. And what's ironic about it is that having done like 30-some movies, you'd really have to look hard before anybody in television or movies would say I was difficult. I'm the opposite end of that because I know how difficult it is for everybody making the movies and the plays and all of that stuff. But even before The Graduate, which was in 1967 and 1960, the only place I was working was the Sunday morning shows in New York. That was before Meet the Press. They had shows like, Bill will remember, Look Up and Live, Lamp Unto My Feet, Camera 3. And that's the only place I was working. Through somebody, a friend in class, introduced me to the casting director, and I'm over there with James Earl Jones, Ruby Dee, Ossie Davis, people like that. We do a reading around a table. And then they would decide that they didn't need these many actors, and they'd give them $25 and let them go. And I said to the casting woman, gee, that's going to make people feel bad. Well, it's nothing personal. We do this all the time. And then we cut the script down, and then I said, yeah, but I mean, I don't think you really should do that. You should make that determination before you bring people in, and you really can't do that. And I was 25 and not working anywhere. In fact, I was still driving a cab. And she said, well, what are you saying? I said, I'm saying you can't do that. Otherwise, I'm going to say something to the union. You just can't send people on their way with $25. They're going to feel rejected. She said, well, if we keep them, then you won't call the union, right? I said, right. She said, but you'll never work here again. I said, and I never did. So that's the same principle long before The Graduate. And it's the same principle of why I quit 60 Minutes. Nobody ever quit 60 Minutes 2, it was called at that time. Great group of people, really smart guy, wonderful guy, runs 60 Minutes. No problem with him, but if you're a commentator, you can't have discussions on what you should be commenting on. Well, as I said to him when I quit, trying to make it nice, I said the first couple of years I never get past the idea that it says 60 Minutes and nobody's stopping me, frisking me and throwing me out on the streets. I'm actually there. But into the third year in the new contract, I just thought, and again, this is just the way they were doing. Andy Rooney, I'm sure, had much more latitude to say what he wanted. I didn't. So it was more, maybe not this, maybe this, maybe that. It was like a contributor, like a staff writer and somebody running a show. And that's not what I wanted to do. Because even though that one day they decided not to run something. And that's why I said, well, yeah, you can't do this. Now, the reason for that is I had to be exclusive. I couldn't do movies. I couldn't appear other plays. I'm exclusive, but I might not be there. So I left. Only a misunderstanding. They just shouldn't have called it a commentator because that means something to me. And that's why I like the radio. Because on the radio, I do it at home. I send in a disc. Frankly, almost no one has ever said they like what I do. I've been doing it for 3 years. But they do say, if they don't get it, where's the disc? So that's all I need. Yes, you were whatever.
Again.
Really?
Use bathroom?
60-minute tape?
21.
Dominoes that
Really?
fell, and
Yeah.
then you had Dusty Hoffman gets a career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then, I mean, if I hadn't gone on and had a movie career myself with The Heartbreak Kid and all, sure, like 5 years later, I might feel differently about The Graduate, but I still think I'm right. And I don't really care that I wasn't in The Graduate.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't even, and I actually feel good about it. And I feel good about, now I can say that because I always have worked. I can't tell you. My advice to somebody else might be take the 500 and don't say anything. But for me personally, I'm not that interested in money. I mean, I was turning down commercials when I was a cab driver. Money has never been a driving force for me. I don't care. My wife knows this. I live in a really nice place and a big house, and I don't really need anything. I need a notebook and a pen and a chair, and I have very little needs for things. I appreciate it what I have, but it's not like I need it. I don't need it. I need more peace of mind than I need a big car.
Are we rolling?
Yeah, we're rolling.
Then was that posed on camera?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was on camera.
Okay.
I'm curious how your goals of what you were trying to do have changed. When you first started and you saw Montgomery Clift as this romantic, youthful, idealistic idea of I just want to be in the business. But how has it changed? What are the goals now?
The goals now are to be essential. For me right now, the most important thing is to be helpful. And it has been that for some time. Even in 1969, when I made the Simon and Garfunkel special for CBS, which is a whole story of like, why would I? I'd never had no experience in that field, but there I was. They thought I should because I knew them, and it was sponsored by AT&T, and it was about social injustice. It was about Vietnam. It was about equality among the races. It was about all those things. About Cesar Chavez and Robert Kennedy, and they when they saw the show, AT&T was a sponsor, as I said, and they sent their representative, angrily confronted me and said, "You're using our money to sell your ideology." I said, "What's my ideology?" I really had no idea what he meant, and he said, "The humanistic approach."
Oh, dear me.
He was. I told that story at Mrs. Kennedy's house. So the most important thing for me, if I can be helpful. Number one, and the other thing, the other thing that's like a close second is to amuse, to be helpful and to amuse. It's not that easy to be helpful. It's not that easy. It's hard. If you can think of something to do to be helpful to somebody, I mean, it's just not. You can't just say, "Oh, I'll be helpful." And then I have my flaw. I have a major flaw. I should mention, and me specifically, and it's been true for some time. Really true, is I really don't like to go anywhere. So it puts some limitations on my ability to be helpful.
Your ability to be helpful reflects on the classic of Judaism in the little shtetls where they would hire a schnorrer, hire a beggar, so that they could fulfill their biblical need.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everyone likes it, and where does it rank, and what's on your mind? I mean, as much as I want to do this, it's difficult. I mean, this felony murder case, this boy in California. I'm in touch with Schwarzenegger's office. I've got Ethel Kennedy writing a letter. I'm actually writing the letter that goes with the request for clemency. It's all good, except it may be useless. Well, I mean, it's good. It's a noble effort, but I won't consider that I've been helpful if he stays in prison for the rest of his life. It just means a nice try. So and he said this. The boy, he said, what he likes is. Somebody did an article, and they interviewed him from the prison, and he said, he knows. He said he knows that the outcome here is not necessarily a good one. Now he's got the same sentence as Gary Ridgway, who admitted to killing 48 people, and he's a teenager who got drunk and got into a fight. That's all he did. And what's really mind-boggling about it, nobody says he did anything different. Not the government. They don't say he killed anyone. Nobody took anything. How can you do that? How can you do that? You know what they say? They say, well, the boy who did the stabbing wouldn't have done it if the others. Well, they didn't even know he had a knife, and he didn't go to stab. His little brother was getting beaten up by another kid. That's the kid he stabbed. It was a horrible thing to happen. But this boy, from nothing, he was already drunk when he walks out of the van up to the thing. I mean, this stuff. So the desire is there. But and I have a colleague who's 28 years old, movie producer out there, who makes me look like I'm sleeping on this case. You know, this kid every weekend goes to juvenile facilities and teaches creative writing. This kid constantly goes to the prison to visit all the boys. So, you know, there's not a lot of people want to do this. You know, I mean, so I'm kind of, you know, in a way I want to do it, but you know, coming to New York is about as far as I go, you know, so you do everything you can.
What would you say is the best avenue or best medium for you to be helpful today? Like, I mean, what was it like if you were on 60 Minutes or on your own network, you know, your own cable news show, you know, when you had the Charles Grodin show, were you free to express the opinions? Yes, and
then free to have them get rid of me. When I had Bobby Kennedy on talking about General Electric dumping PCBs in the Hudson, that's when I was canceled. I'm the kind of person that doesn't even think that the station I'm on is owned by General Electric. It's my power and my vulnerability. I don't think about that. I don't think about the consequences. I just think about what's right. It never occurred to me there's anything wrong with having Robert Kennedy Jr. talk about pollution in the Hudson. It would never occur to me. And it won't now. I mean, so that's the way they're going to do it, because when they say liberal bias, all these NBC, I've worked for NBC, I've worked for CBS, I never saw any liberal bias. They're owned by big conglomerates that are conservative. General Electric is not liberal. Viacom, some of the rest that'll tell you he voted for President Bush. It's all self-interest. It's about business. So any kind of bias, I just don't see it. I don't know what you know what they call what some people are calling liberal bias. I just call humanism. If you talk about the kids going to bed hungry, which they do, incredible numbers in America. If you talk about people freezing to death in the winter on the streets of New York City, which they do. If you talk about problems in the prison, you're a liberal. How does that make you a liberal? Why doesn't that just make you a person? But suddenly that's a liberal. I'm not for free lunch. I don't think people should just be given their stuff. Everybody should be on welfare. I think everybody should work for a living. I don't know what's so liberal about it. But they make this about, it's not liberalism. That's just and most of the people, a lot of the people I know, particularly where I live, are conservative. And I like to talk to them and say, what is it you disagree with that I say? I don't know what is it I'm saying? What the kid, you think it's okay the kids go to bed hungry? Where's the liberal thing come? Liberal would be legalization of all drugs. Liberal would be, I have a couple of friends that are really what you would call liberal that didn't even want to go after the Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, let alone Iraq. There are positions that you are authentically liberal, but that's not what I talk about. I just talk about agenda, but people don't think about it much. It's always liberal, and that's why I like to be friends with Orrin Hatch, who's like extremely conservative, because I can always talk to someone because we're talking about human issues, security. It's not about liberal or conservative. It just isn't, and too much of this talk is about that. And like I said to my friend Dale Volcker, who's like a real conservative state senator in New York, considered the toughest of the tough. I said, the Democrats and Republicans are going to be in a building somewhere, going back and forth the way they do, lobbing these things that they do at each other, and then somebody's going to blow up the building. And you're going to be there arguing over polarized politics, which is like deadly. So all these people that just get up there and say, oh, the liberals, or all these stupid, all this stuff is very damaging. And so I try in my commentaries not to do that. Sometimes it gets away from me when they say scum of the earth, and I start getting a little rough,
So you're XMR, you're extreme middle of the road.
Yeah, well, I think that's where you want to be and pull everybody together and really try to do that. Otherwise, we're going to blow ourselves up. It's really getting bad. If we don't attack other countries, we'll just attack each other. You think you got it? Do you think we have it? The only thing I haven't told you about my bris.
We'll go in for a close-up.
We have one more because we were talking a lot about this, about comedy's role in history, right, and how it can play a really integral part in, we think, potentially saving the world. You know, because you have an advantage that's very unique, being able to access these people through humor.
Right.
So maybe you could just say something again about.
Well, I know more about, you look at Bono, is that who he is? I mean, the access he's had with Earl Hunger, not a humorist, but a famous musician. There's no question that, I don't know, the humorists, most of I'll tell you what I do that's different than a lot of the people that have access through celebrity, is I don't do it at big rallies. I do it on the phone privately because and I'm not associated with any organizations. So people know that I'm not out there to get my name in the paper. And whenever they've asked me to join these things, I said, you don't want me to pick at the governor's office. You want me to be in the governor's office. So here's a good example of it. And I think it's all right. This isn't going out across the country. This is for Emerson. But here's a good example of it. When they recently revised the Rockefeller drug laws in New York, they invited me to the adjusted bill. It's not really good enough, but it's going to help a lot of people get out of prison. So some of the more people that I know didn't want to go, but I went, and Governor Pataki acknowledged the work I'd done for several years, and the Senate, the Republican leader and the Democrat, they all acknowledged me from the thing, and then. And he worked hard for years, et cetera, and then they have the bill signing, and I've seen them do on television a lot. Twice he gives me one of the pens. Okay, I go home, and I look at the pen, and it's made in Taiwan. So I think, now should I do a commentary on this? So I decided to call the governor's office and tell someone there. I said, just be aware your pens are made in Taiwan. I thought it was more. See, that didn't seem to be a moral issue. It didn't need this from me. So instead of being the person who takes the pen and gets the thanks and says, and it was made in Taiwan, I call and say, be aware, you may think it's nothing, but somebody, it's not going to be me. I'm saying it here, but I didn't do. You don't want to slam somebody. But when I was up in Albany, I don't know, several months ago, the Republican leader took me to a big party where they have all the Republican leadership. If people saw me walking in, and they couldn't believe it. It was like, geez, what's he doing here? There's still this perception. Well, I gave a luncheon up there once and showed some video, and one of the senators said, I know you. You want to let everybody out of prison. I said, well, is that not true? That's just absolutely not true. I just want to make sure the people who are there should be there. I don't want to let everyone out. Completely opposite. There's a lot of psychotics, killers, and you think I want to let, no, just let that woman out that you set up who was on welfare. And they did. Let her out. She didn't do anything. You waved $2,500 in front of her face and got a welfare mother of 4 small children to deliver a packet, and then arrested her and sent her to prison for 20 years to life, and then let her out after 16. 16 years this woman spent in prison because they waved a couple. She had nothing. Let her out. And they did. And 3 other women too. They did. So you want the access, and you don't say, yeah, but your pen was made in Taiwan. You let that go. But you don't let the big stuff go. Okay?
Excellent shot. Really, really.
Is there anything last thing that you didn't get to say that you'd like to?
That if you're on a camera and under the lights, it's probably better not to wear long johns.
That's the lesson of the day.
That's the most important thing.
So, are you okay? We didn't.
No. It's great. It was great. I enjoyed it.
Good.
Of course, I've heard these stories before, but still.
Okay.
Like I said once, I forget where I was appearing, and I said, I'm anxious to hear what I have to say, because around my house they say, "Well, is he still here?"
Thank you.
Thank you so much.